Dan, 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 Dan. Welcome back to another episode of the Strongman Winner Circle podcast. I'm your host, Nicholas Camby. This is episode 44 with a returning guest of Dan Hughes. And Dan Hughes is coming off a big podium at World's Strongest Man, taking second place, taking the silver, and he's hungry for more. Dan,
He is.
welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
How's Dan feeling? How's the body feeling? How's the brain feeling? How's the nose feeling? Everything.
The nose is the largest organ on my head, so it's feeling pretty great. But overall, I feel pretty good as far as post-comp. Probably the first competition I've done in a while that I didn't feel like absolute death physically afterwards. My lower back flared up a little, but I just kind of I took a vacation the week after, just relaxed, went home. My family lives in Central Florida, so after the competition, I just drove down there. Just completely relaxed, didn't touch any weights, which was great. Mentally, it was kind of like up and down. There's some psychological studies that second and fourth place are the two worst placings you can get. I think it was done with Olympic athletes, and I felt that. I mean, obviously, it was exciting being my first OSG, placing second. Pretty good, pretty proud of that. Obviously, going into shows, every show you want yourself to win, but I was beat fair and square, so no issues with that. But it still kind of stings. People keep telling me I should be happy with it, but I think
it's all in our nature. We always want a little more. We always want to see different areas where you can improve. But being grateful for second, and you put out a great show, and I think you gave yourself more reasons to continue in the sport. So I think that's always important. But let's talk about the whole contest. So leading up to it, how you felt during the show, of course, the results after, who you met, who you hung out with. Give us the OSU rundown.
So leading up to it, as I mentioned on the pre-OSG show with Frank, Mike, Justin, and yourself, prep wasn't ideal situations. I had to do a lot of travel for work. It's the reason I pulled out of ASM, because the majority of my travel was in August and September. But I don't think I let it affect me too much physically. Terry and I worked together quite well, communicated a lot when we needed to move stuff around, adjust certain things based on schedule. I was pretty confident on most of the events, minus yoke, going into the show, just because yoke was it seemed really heavy. It shouldn't have been really heavy, and I still to this day I think about it a lot. I don't know why in training 900-pound yoke was so heavy for me, because yoke used to be such a, even when I first started, like up in Alaska, me and Justin would run 700, 800-pound yokes. Obviously not fly with them, but like we weren't scared of it, and we could handle it. But then 4 years later, I don't know, maybe it was a mental thing. I just had a lot of issues in training. And actually the most I ever did in training was 900 for like 15 feet. And that was my last heavy session going into it. So
was the car walk making a difference, like with the potential wheels, maybe picking up higher so the wheels didn't hit the ground? Taking that to a factor?
But I mean, I did pretty well. And I think I was fifth. I think I was the slowest person to finish the whole 50 feet in the finals. Somebody can fact check that, but I believe I got 19.5, which for me and any other contest is pretty slow for 50 feet. But if you watch the video, I pick it up and I was like shocked, and I'm sure it was the adrenaline and stuff, but I picked it up and I was pretty shocked like how easily it moved. And the whole time before it, I kept saying to myself, like, slow, like short steps, like don't try and stride it out. It's not a 700-pound yoke. Like you're not gonna be able to sprint with it. But I picked it up and the first thing I thought was, this is light, I can sprint with it. So I tried to, and I started to take too long a stride. So I dropped it and then repicked it and finished it.
But
So
the key to the car yoke is taking off the parking brake. You can't go anywhere if you don't take the parking brake off.
Well, Romark mic'd me up, and a bunch of people made fun of me because the whole time before we're going, when I'm inside the car, I'm just like, hold together, come on, hold together, like you got this. And people are like, do you always talk to yourself like that? And I said, I wasn't talking to myself, I was talking to my lower back, because it has a mind of its own on when it wants to work and when it doesn't. So I was just like that, because that's usually where I fail on yoke, as I start to feel wonky in my back. But that car, I mean, yeah, it's not necessarily balanced because it's the whole shell of a car, but it is really stable. The handles are close to you. You can brace a lot better than you can on like a big wide yoke, like the one I had at the gym. It's the Bartos yoke. It's really nice yoke, but it's pretty wide.
Very wide. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
But I interrupted you. You were going through the kind of the events. It's kind of like the lead up.
Oh yeah. So on Viking, I had a very good prep for Viking. I was confident in that, but also, like I mentioned on the last episode that we did, was a lot of people were gonna miss I guess misgauge how heavy that 325 in hand was gonna feel. And sure enough, a lot of people came off and they're like, wow, that was a lot heavier than I thought it was gonna be. Whereas I went in, and you and I have talked about this privately before, like the best thing you can do is just get as strong as possible in that movement pattern. So that's what I did. That's what Terry and I did. And then going into the comp, I said to myself, be 100% prepared for this to feel like 400 pounds on your chest when you get under it. I think a lot of people did the exact opposite, and they're like, oh, I crushed comp weight. Like I did 15 reps in comp weight or whatever. So they got under it. And as soon as they blew the whistle, they were like, oh shit. And I'm not guessing when I say that, because that's exactly what a lot of people said when they came off. I did the exact opposite. I was like, just expect this is going to be the heaviest thing you've ever pressed in your life. Get under it. And then I got enough reps to get third place, and I came off, and I was very happy with that, because each rep for me was just like, sweet, just do one more, just do one more, just do one more. And it worked for me. Then of course I made fun of Hein, because he did 12, and I was like, you stupid idiot, you did double my reps, and you still only got 2 points on me. But
so you end up getting third on the press, and then you got like second on the deadlift, right?
I tied for, I think it was a 2-way tie for second on the deadlift. There was a 4-way tie for first. And then I got 9. And again, a lot of people were just as shocked as I was when I did super well on the axle deadlift, just like I did at Clash.
I think you're turning into a static monster.
Yeah, maybe. The wild thing is somebody asked me how much what my 1 rep max is, and I haven't trained for a 1 rep max deadlift since 2020 nationals, which is the first nationals I did. And I pulled like 745 or whatever as the last event on a last man standing. And I think, at least without a suit, that's the most I've pulled. And but I did the math in a rep calculator. Apparently my deadlift max is 825 now, so I'm just gonna cling on to that. If you can do 640 times 9, that's what it comes out to.
But 745, it was, of course, at the end of the show at nationals, and of course the big long lines of like 70 competitors.
Oh yeah,
going in. So that's of course 745 of course when you're most tired. So
it's funny because bringing that up, I told this story recently, and I wish I could remember the name of the person who told me this, but there's like 10 people left in that line, and I knew no one knew who I was aside from Justin, and that was fine because it was my first nationals, and probably like only the second or third competition I did in the lower 48, because I started competing in Alaska. And somebody looked at me and said, "You're still here?" And I so badly wish I could remember who it was, because damn straight I'm still here and I'm still getting better.
It was probably Frank.
No, it wasn't, because Frank, I met Frank the first time there, but he was friendly to me because I was friends with Justin. And he made fun of me for being an officer in the Army because he was enlisted. But no, it wasn't Frank. I would have remembered that. Because I remember the people in that line were like Mike, Justin, and Frank. Those are the only people I remember off the top of my head.
Dan Lorenzo would have been probably in that mix.
Yeah, I think so. Like obviously now if I were to look at the list, I would know who any of those guys were. But at the time, I wasn't thinking about who I was lifting with or anything like that. Like I'm sure Richie was in the line still and stuff like that. But yeah, I'll never forget that. Somebody just looked me dead in the eyes and like, wow, you're still here. And I was like, I'm about to pull more.
So you're saying you've been you were a static monster at OSG, and then you were again, you're still running through the events.
Yeah. Then what was after that? Sam, what was after deadlift?
The shouldering the day after, right?
Well, that was the fourth event. So it was deadlift and then farmers. That's what it was. Yeah. Farmers, I wore the wrong shoes. I wore the shoes I've been training this whole time. It was really slippery. And I know I'm not the only person who shared that, sentiment. I thought my feet were just slippery in the warm-up area because there's chalk everywhere. I wiped them off before, but that floor was just so smooth. So I probably lost, my leg completely slipped out from under me on the turn, probably lost a second or two on that. But I was pretty excited when they switched to just the heavy handles each way. I know not a lot of people were because my farmer's training had been going really well. I never dropped any of the weights above comp weight. So I knew that would make me more competitive for that because carrying the heavier weight for a longer distance was probably going to, spread it out a little bit more as far as the points go.
But going to the farmers, did you ever see the trick where you lay out the towel and you either put water or put alcohol?
Yeah, well, that's what they did. I don't know if they did that before. I know they had it on day 2, but again, like I didn't think, because I've worn those shoes before. They're just the Metcons. But then the next day, if you watch the videos, the next day I wore my my Nobles the whole time because they weren't much better because the floor was still pretty slippery, but they were just a little bit grippier than the farmers. But I wore the Nobles for the yoke, and I was mad. I should have brought my hiking boots, my freaking the ones I wore at Clash and at Nationals, because those definitely would have been way grippier, but I didn't even pack them because I hadn't been training in them at all for this comp prep. And then dumbbell is probably the event that I had the most regrets about. I think I kind of freaked out going into it because if I was to guess, dumbbell prep was probably the best event prep that I made the most progress in. I was able to crush the whole event and training at over comp weight for I think my fastest time was like 21 seconds. Like I blew through it. So I was super stoked about that. I thought I was going to take first or second on that. And then I just got really twitchy and started making a bunch of big mistakes in it. Like I almost failed the 180. I may have actually failed it the first time and did it the second time. But so that was pretty demoralizing for me. And then going into the stones, I did do a lot more stone prep this comp as opposed to for Clash, where stones is the sole reason I lost because I was tied for first going into stones at Clash. So I tried not to make that mistake again. Still didn't win the event, but did a lot better. And I think I'm finally starting to get over the mental hurdle with my lower back on stones and kind of just going back to how I used to be. Because before I hurt my back, which for those of you who don't know, was on stones in 2021, beginning of 2021. Ever since then, I've had this weird mental block where just like looking at stones makes my back hurt.
Is it the triple extension that bothers you?
Yeah, well, actually how I blew that disc out was in the triple extension. But it's wild because if you watch the way I do my sandbag to shoulder or a lot of other events, I do a pretty big triple extension and it doesn't bother me at all, either mentally or physically. But it's just like looking at stones and like standing over it, bending down to pick it up. It's like my body immediately goes into protective mode where it's like, you're going to hurt yourself. But I'm starting to get over that. Mostly just by forcing myself to practice it and practicing it with good form, obviously. and not trying to force reps in training just to like get a PR in training or anything like that. But, you know, if I can't do it with perfect form in training, I shouldn't do it. Save the grinding and stuff like that for the competitions is kind of how I focus, because that's how I heard it 4 weeks before Clash. I was trying to do a huge PR on a stone lift and just blew my back.
Ouch. Yeah, but we did have the opportunity that at that time to go up to 500 pounds on the stone lift. So of course everybody was training pretty heavy, including myself. Did you visit the friendly chiropractors or the masseuses during the competition, like Ray the chiropractor, of course, Strongman Doc, Becky?
No, I didn't during the comp. We have at work now, we have a massage therapist, and then of course I see Rebecca Skilgen
of Arena
Chiropractic fairly regularly. This is actually a good thing. I didn't have to see her as much this prep as I did for Clash prep. Mostly because a lot of the warm-ups and stuff that she's given me and some technique critiques have helped me both with my knees and my back a lot during training. So I started going back to seeing her about once a month, whereas for Clash prep, I saw her anywhere from 2 to 3 times a month. And then I see a massage therapist almost once a week just to help, keep everything where it needs to be loosened up, and helps with recovery as well. But no, I didn't feel the need to see anybody during the competition, which I think is a testament to both Rebecca and my massage therapist, Maggie.
So they did a great job. So how did you feel standing on the podium? Of course, your second big podium in your 100 career.
It was awesome. It was very exciting. I don't know. I'm gonna be honest. You can call me a Debbie Downer. I hated being second. I hated it so much. Like Sean DeMarinis, he sent me a picture of his second place OSG trophy, and he was just like, "This is my least favorite trophy too." And so I have it on my trophy case right here, and it's honestly more of a reminder to do better and less of a point of pride, which may sound silly to a lot of people, but that's my truth.
Now, in general, if you had to kind of compare it to your other performances, like of course you had a great nationals performance last year. You did great even at the Clashes, and even the Rainier you won last year. How would you grade it towards the other performances? Did you execute the best you could across the 7 contests, across the 7 events, or have you executed better in other shows?
That's a good question. I still think my best performance was at Clash this year, Clash 22. And even though I placed 3rd there, I would say that because that was finally like the first competition where I realized how much of my potential I could unlock by actually believing in myself, which may be cheesy to people listening. It may not, but like I struggle with a lot of mental health stuff, and I hate myself, which I don't say that to be funny, but it's true. And like that's affected my training a lot, especially training alone, like I have to without anyone in the gym. There's been some hurdles there, and I actually still to this day don't even know what the trigger was. It was just like I zeroed the squat at the first event and at Clash, and then all of a sudden it was like something clicked, and I was like, I'm gonna win. And there was no reason for me to believe that, but I actually convinced myself that I was going to do that. And I was tied for first going into it. And the reason I was okay with that, and I told Isaac, because they lined us up by placing, and me and him were next to each other. I looked at him and I shook his hand, and I was like, "Congrats, man, you won." And he was like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "I suck at stones. I'm not going to do this." And so, but I was like really happy with myself because it was both a mental win, and 3rd place there still isn't bad. Against that pool of athletes.
But I know next time you won't say that, Isaac. You'll be like, "Best of luck out there."
Yeah. Pull a Happy Gilmore after I load the last stone and look at him. Someone learned how to play.
Anything else to kind of mention on OSG? Of course, again, kind of a momentous occasion.
It was a freaking marathon. For those who were watching afar, it's supposed to be a 3-day comp. They crushed it into 2 days. We did 3 events and then 4 events, which in itself isn't too crazy. But because they were just trying to do the best they could with the time that we had in rush events, there wasn't a really solid schedule. So there's a lot of just sitting there and kind of like gauging who, what weight class are we on. And so that alone, for the people who were able to push through that and not let it affect their training, is a pretty good testament to their mental fortitude. Because it's like, I mean, anyone who's done nationals or any show like that, it sucks because there's so many people to wait to go and all the different classes. But you usually have a pretty good idea of when you're going to go. There was, I think the longest between 2 events was like 4 hours. And again, that's not a knock on, I think the promoters, Lan, and everybody else involved did the best they could with what they had. It was just unfortunate they couldn't control the hurricane and have it go somewhere else. But for that to be your first OSG was made, at first I was like, wow, I don't want to do this again. This is miserable. But I mean, they're not all supposed to be like that, and that's no one's fault. But that was pretty much it. That was my last thought, and then just my second place trophy just staring at my face all the time.
But Dan, do you know about the other second place winners at World's Strongest Man 105 kilo and what they went on to do?
I know Sean.
So Sean, in 2016, of course, Sean took second. He took second behind Marcin Senwicki of Poland. And actually, it's me and Rob Kearney's fault he took second. If me and Rob Kearney loaded the last stone, because Marcin didn't load all the stones. So if we loaded all the last stones, both of us did it, Sean would have got the point difference to win the event. But because of that, Sean's taken second by a point and a half or so. So
it was friends like you who needs friends, right?
Well, yeah, but I know we failed him as Team America. So 2016, he already had 2 America's Strongest Man titles, but he went on to win 2 more America's Strongest Man titles to make it 4. In 2005, Darren Sadler took second at World's Strongest Man 105 kilo. In 2006, he went on to win it. Myself in 2017 took second, and then I went on to win a few titles. In 2019, Isaac Mays took second.
Yep.
Went on to win Clash. So winning Worlds, winning Clash, winning ASM, you're kind of in pretty good company. And then there's a gentleman who took second back when Marius Rosenthal's of Latvia. He's been around. He podiumed 2 more times at Worlds. And I think recently he won the World's Strongest Man 105 kilo Masters that was out in Paris. And then there's a guy named Vladimir Reshka of the Ukraine, who was a great athlete. He took second again after taking second, but also went on just to always podium at pretty much all the big shows. He always was on the podium, but he was a great athlete. He was a freak and also had a really great yoke. But do you know any of those names?
Yeah, it's not bad. I don't know many of the Europeans, to be honest. And also, like, I didn't start competing in the sport until 2017, so most of the stuff before that is lost on me. But I mean, it's not bad company to be in. I'm certainly not trying to say feel sorry for me for coming in second. It's just I'm trying to spin it into motivation to do the things that the people on that list did after they came in second.
But who had a lot of second places was Hafir Bjornsson and also Zerjurn Savickas.
Exactly.
He had a lot of seconds. But speaking of also second places, I don't know if you've seen Ty Cotton recently, but he's taken 4 straight second places, between 3 at ASM and 1 at OSG. So he's hungry for a title. I think he's going to be winning contests, especially with those traps that go up to his ears. I don't know if you watched that log. But I did want to talk about, we had a lot of fan submissions in terms of topics and also specific questions for Dan. But in general, in terms of Dan's opinions, so we're going to change the subject. So one individual is saying the sport looks more like CrossFit. So he's probably referring to maybe lighter weights, more moving. But is this a good thing for the sport of strongman? And where will the static monsters fit in?
So I've heard that the first part of that, the starting to look like CrossFit, and I see where that statement is coming from. But also, if you look at some of the weights that we're doing, they are, at least at the middleweight level, they're similar and in some cases heavier than where World's Strongest Man was doing the same types of events 10, 15 years ago. And that's the heavyweight World's Strongest Man that I'm talking about. But also for the static monsters, like if you're only, if your best events are the 1 rep maxes for different events, then I would say you're in the wrong sport, because while it is strongest man or strongman, I mean, it's no secret that it's to test the most well-rounded athlete. Because if it wasn't, then it wouldn't be the overall points. It would be, you know, who wins the most events. But I mean, we've seen it all the time at any weight class. You see people who will win first place in the deadlift, and then they're in the bottom half or, you know, middle third on everything else. So, and no one's going to argue that, oh, but they set a deadlift record, so they deserve to win, because that's 1 out of 5 or 8 or 10 events. And CrossFit's the same way. Like, you have someone like Danny Spiegel in CrossFit, who she always does really well on the heavy events, but she's never on the podium or even in the top 10. She's good enough to make it to the games, but no one complains about her like, well, we need to be lighter. So I don't think in CrossFit or in strongman, we need to say, like, the best part about the sport is that there's variation in it, which is similar to CrossFit. I think there are likenesses, but I don't think those likenesses are necessarily a bad thing. And I will say that as someone who's not super statically strong, at least at the top end, I always beg for 1 rep maxes. I always beg for 1 rep maxes, because like I said, the last time I trained for a 1 rep max deadlift was 2020. And it's not even my best event, but I love doing it, and it forces me to get stronger in those events. But the reason we aren't seeing a lot of those is because it's less fun to watch. Especially, like, you see them a lot at smaller shows that maybe don't have any live coverage. I know one reason they didn't do it at Clash last year is because of you know, the ESPN live stuff, and it's really hard to do that fast and make it effective and fun for the athletes while also making it attractive for viewers to watch. And if anyone wants to monetize the sport or continue to, you know, monetize the sport greater and greater, you have to make it appealing to the viewers. And most people who know Eddie Hall's 500, was it 501 or 500 kilo deadlift when he did it, I would venture that probably 99.9% of the world did not watch that live. They watched a video of it and they're like, see, that's awesome. But if you would have sat them in the stadium and been like, okay, now watch this 2-hour show where all these people do 1 rep and then they go back and they warm up, like, they'd be like, wow, this is really boring. And I think that's why we don't see as much top end 1 rep max stuff. But if somebody wants to put in a show, I'll do it.
Of course, there's always the right way. You know, OSG had it one year back in 2017, where they started off with, for instance, some of the weight classes, depending on how many competitors were. They started with 3 lanes, narrowed down to 2 lanes, and then they had a final lane. And I think that was kind of exciting. That's a little bit kind of what the Rogue did at the CrossFit, where they had so you were talking about Danny Spiegel earlier. They started with the four lanes, and they went down to 2, and then went down to 1 when they had that center stage. So I think that's that could be a good way in terms of kind of going through it. So maybe something to adopt, but then it requires a lot of equipment. But if someone wants to put all that effort, I think that would be kind of the way to go.
And then the last thing I'll say to that, if that's your complaint about the sport, then just continue to work on your capacity for your competitions. That's not going to take away. It's not like we're not asking anybody to run 5 miles and then do a max deadlift or deadlift for reps. It's still all pretty much the same events. And as someone who's not great at top end strength, I would love for the opportunity to improve mine, which is why the people who are really good at top end strength and not much else should also be excited for the opportunity to improve their capacity within those same movements. I think it's kind of a cop out when people say like, oh, well, I would have won at this 1 rep max. It's like, yeah, and I would have won if it was a 5 mile run. but that's not what the event was. So just train for the event that is given to you and stop complaining and just do better.
I like it. Of course, another topic from the fans. Is there a right way to use social media when it comes to strongman? Does Dan have any opinions on this? If you want to think, I can give you a few of my tidbits.
Yeah, you can go first and then I'll go.
Sure. I always think it should be an extension of yourself. I think it never should be a personality. You shouldn't be a different person on social media and then you show up in contests in person at the gym being maybe a quiet individual or something like that, especially if you're loud on social media. It should be an extension where people can find you and learn more about you. But also, I always said just the day and age, because there's this point of self-promotion, your name out there for sponsors. So usually, again, sponsors are not going to be there to enable for you to get out of your current job and do strongman full time, but it is going to help kind of negate some of the costs, but potentially kind of break even. So it was always important. So being able to promote yourself so you can keep giving yourself reasons to be in the sport, I think is also super important. But one thing I said to myself when it came to kind of social media is I never wanted social media to be a limiting factor of why I don't get opportunities. So I think you don't want to, I think there's one way to be overboard, but there's another way to be efficient enough to put yourself out there, put enough information out there so people can learn about you. And again, you want opportunities so you can keep being in the sport. You don't want to be, of course, kind of limit yourself. So I think it is something that you just have to work at, even if it's not something natural or something that you want to do.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's kind of a slippery slope because I definitely don't think social media should be used as an alternative personality, which I think that is the case, like you mentioned, for some people. But at the same time, there are certain trends and certain things that if you want to, especially if you want to get to the level where you're able to monetize it, there's certain things that may not inherently be a part of your character, but they don't contradict your character, if that makes sense. So like, it may not be something that I would do if I wasn't trying to promote something or, share a certain aspect of my training. But, that's a requirement that you have to do to be relevant in the sport, especially now. And it's not something that you had to do 10 years ago, or probably even 5 years ago to a degree. But I think a lot of people will flow in and out of different personalities depending on, what's hot and what's going to get the most views at the time, to the point to where it's not actually who they are, but it's an alternative version of what they want people to believe. And I would like to think that if you went through my social media, whether it's through my story on any given day or any of my hard posts, that, that's me. Whether it's like occasionally I post I play with a soccer ball in between sets, and while I've only posted it like 1 or 2 times on actual videos, I do that every single day. Like I always have a soccer ball in the gym with me.
Dan, it's football. It's not called soccer. That's only
American. It is. I'm trying to cater to the audience. I don't know who your audience is. I'm assuming they're Americans. I didn't want them to get confused.
10%. It's probably British. That's, I think, okay. I saw the analytics.
For the record, I do call it football. Oh, Man U plays their first game back since the World Cup tomorrow, which is super exciting. But anyway, I don't really condemn people when I see them do that, especially people that I know, like personally. And it's like, that's not you. You're not being yourself right now. Because I kind of get it to a degree. But I do think that as far as it being an extension of yourself, that's also a slippery slope, because some people lose their own personality in social media and it just becomes who they are, and they don't know how to act outside of social media. And it may not even be that they're shy. They just literally don't know how to have an articulate thought unless they're typing it on their story. And then when you see them in person and you try to have the same exact conversation, they don't know how to either argue or debate in real time because they can't type it or they can't research stuff, and they become so dependent on being able to have all their serious discussions through their phone. And I don't think that's specific to the sport. I think that's my little boomer commentary on social media in general.
Just the effect of technology.
Yeah, it's technology has made us all dumber, myself included. I'm not precluded from that, but yeah, social media is wild. And there's a lot of times, multiple times during the week, where I just want to throw my phone across the room because I'm like, wow, we are all so dumb. Certain people should not have phones.
Dan, do you follow other competitors leading into training when it comes to competitions? Like, for instance, were you looking at other competitors training leading into OSG?
Not generally, but to be honest, I don't follow, like, I mean, I follow them on Instagram. I am not a big scroller. I try to get away from doom scrolling. So like if I see somebody post something in comp prep, I'll look at it. It's not like I'm scrolling and be like, oh no, I can't look, don't want to watch this video because I compete against them next week. But I certainly don't and never have really been like a look at the athlete list and go through and see how everybody's doing on their training. And one reason is because some people are really good. I've learned over the last couple of years, some people are really good at training. They're not good at competing, but I would let their training videos affect my performance going into it because it's like, oh, well, so-and-so did this in training. Like I got to do that. But then you get to the comp and then you smoke them on an event that in training they were crushing you in. And so in order to kind of avoid that whole line of thinking, it's like, it doesn't matter. Like I wish them the best. I hope their training's going well. But most of the time I don't observe it, at least deliberately. But yeah, like I said, I won't unfollow or mute anybody during contest prep just so I don't see their stuff on accident.
I always like to think about if you're watching other competitors in terms of what they do in the competition, how far away they did it from the competition, and then what they actually do in competition. So I feel it gives you even data set for your own self, even for other 105s, that where you need to be in a certain time. So for instance, I'm going to pick on my buddy Tyler Young. When we were both prepping for the log record in Waco in 2021, I was in my prep, I was focusing on Vipers and strict presses in the 200s. And on Saturdays, Tyler was going out hitting 400 pounds, like over 10 weeks out, which I thought was, and he did it a couple times leading into it. So I was thinking like, is that, maybe should I do that? Should I go heavier? But I also was thinking like, all right, I'm gonna keep those data points and see how that turns out in the competition. Of course, he kind of learned that he should probably peaked a little more. But I try to use that one example. But I think just gathering more data points so you can really figure out. I know, of course, you have a coach with Terry, and of course, you guys discuss programming. But for programming yourself, for all the listeners out there, I think it's always good to get those data points and see how those individuals compete, and then if they're worth following, or like Dan was saying, they're great at training, but not great in the competition. So that's always an interesting point. But has Dan ever messed with your fellow competitors leading into a show on social media? I can tell you my strategy after, but I gotta since
I want to say intentionally, at least certainly not to anyone that I don't already know very well. I would never try and do that. Actually, if anything, on competition days, I probably talk too much and give too much actual advice, which is something I thought about before. And I've always done that. Just like if somebody's warming up and I see them doing something, whether they're my competition or not, it's just like, hey, no, like try it like this. And certainly, and not in a way where it's like I'm trying to change their entire technique so they get in their head before the event. Not like that at all, but just be like, hey, try this. Hey, try this. And like Hein ripped his hand open on the farmers. And I mean, I gave him scissors. I helped him. I showed him how to take care of it because he never had a tear in his hand like that before. So like I helped him take care of his hand instead of being like, oh, that sucks, bud. Hope you figure it out. And then just walking away. Because like I want him to do his best. And I know he wants me to do my best. But that's, yeah, if anything, I probably give too much real advice. People want to keep it close to my chest. But I mean, I talk shit to like Justin and Frank and Mike, and I've talked shit to you. But that's like people that I have a really close relationship with. And if I'm getting into your head when I'm telling you I'm going to beat you on a dumbbell medley, then I mean, that's on you.
What I always like to think about it, I usually led with my press just because, of course, pressing is my favorite. So I always would show all the pressing videos, but I wouldn't show much of the other videos. But sometimes I would save all those videos until the last week and I'll post them in the last week. So when they're done training, so I can't motivate you anymore. So now you're like, oh man, he actually had a great training cycle going into this. What's going to happen now? Or I'll do the other thing where I'll sandbag. I won't post anything. I'll just post unrelated stuff and make you guess if is he hurt? What's going on? So I used to switch it back and forth, but sometimes on purpose, sometimes unintentional. But usually, in the end of the day, of course, I'm interested in see what people pick up on and what they did. I'm not sure.
I did do some of that for OSG. I didn't post a lot of my top sets, like some of my best sets. I didn't exclusively post bad sets necessarily, but I wasn't as. Usually I was just like, hey, this is my top set, and then I post it, and it's like that really is like the best I got. But then there were some where they weren't necessarily fails, but they weren't too impressive, and I would post them and being like, hey, this is how deadlifts went today. But even then, it's just, I guess there's some sort of manipulation there, but it's not really malicious.
I like it, but I think in the end, I think for the modern day going to 2023, there should be some social media presence. You don't never want to lose an opportunity or never lose the opportunity to lose opportunity because you didn't do more on social media and put yourself out there. So you either put yourself out there on social media or compete often that people see you and they put you on social media, one the other. So Dan, let's go through the questions from the listeners. From the Dane train. Is Dan really 240? He looks like he's 255 to me. How much you weighing, Dan?
Well, I'm actually lighter than 240. So no, he's not really 240. For all of OSG, both days, the heaviest I got was 233 for the competition day. For Clash Prep, most of Clash Prep, I was around 250, which is the heaviest I've ever been for more than like a week at a time.
250, 250?
Yeah, 250.
Oh, Dick.
There are some issues in my prep that led to me not being able to hold weight like I would like to. That's not nothing to do with Terry or Justin's diet. Is all personal stuff. But the heaviest I got during OSG prep was probably like 242. Last week, the end of last week when I was training, I was back to 240 ish. I didn't weigh myself this week yet because I'm on vacation, so I'm just kind of only training when I feel like training. But no, I know Frank also didn't believe that I was under 250, which is a great compliment. I appreciate that. But I also know I have a very wide gut. There is a six-pack under here, but I also never really wear too much flattering clothes to make it look like I'm the size that I am.
All right, so hope that's a good answer for the Dane train. I think pretty good question here. Favorite deadlift accessory to strengthen the lower back for the top of the pull. So strengthening the lower back for the top of the pull. So I was almost thinking about this one. Maybe potentially just RDLs in a sense. But what does Dan think?
That's a good question. I mean,
very specific.
Yeah, it's very specific. Specifically for the lockouts, I would probably just say overloaded, elevated deadlifts, but not like 13, 15 inches, like above 18 inches, something above the knee. I don't know.
That's a pretty good answer.
That's probably what I would go with.
Between the two of those, I think you do a pretty good job. Yeah. Best accessories to improve the log. What works for Dan?
Ooh. For me, on the log specifically, I think a lot of shoulder stability stuff is what helped me. Because
one thing unique for me on log was that last like 6 inches. And just because if your hands aren't just perfect, it is a little bit more unstable than like a barbell. And that carries over to all your presses, but that, and then probably some more deliberate tricep work. But I mean, I haven't done log in over, I just started doing log again, and Terry actually didn't even program log, but I just haven't done log in so long that I figured I'd throw it in for my strict pressing. But the biggest thing for me that's improved my log across the board was my front rack position, which both you and Terry, before I started working with Terry, you helped me with a lot.
I sent you one of my front rack position for my instructional videos, which you can find on the YouTube library.
That's been huge. And that whole I've taken bits from that instructional video to help other people who've tried log, like especially with my CrossFitters. When
are you telling my secrets to everybody?
They're not really secrets. I just put words to what other people are seeing in videos. But yeah, and then Terry's real big on that. But yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
But I like it. Tricep strength is huge. I always like a concentric floor press. I preach on that in terms of being really good at log. Neutral presses with the dumbbell, maybe after log is always a good one. But also just mastering log, doing strict presses, viper, push presses, split jerks. Really knowing logs in and out, doing different logs is the best way to improve the log in the long run. This is totally not my question, but what would you do if someone broke your Star Wars Lego?
I would continue to let them outside when they need to pee and poop and feed them dog food, because the only people that have ever broken them are my dogs. And luckily they didn't eat any pieces, but let's hope I don't have to find out what I would do if another person did that. I'd be angry. I'd probably make you put them back together.
Break out the instruction book and all. Yeah. Favorite core exercises, Dan?
Oh, favorite core exercises. It's probably an unpopular opinion, but any like offset core stability stuff. And that is because, so like stuff like suitcase carries, banded bamboo walks, stuff like that. And the reason being is because I did a ton of those and still continue to do them, just not as frequently, for my back rehab. Like Dr. Stuart McGill and Dr. Andrew Locke both have really good videos on all of those. And so, yeah, they're not going to be the like get your 6-pack abs type core workouts, but those helped me a lot, both with moving events and static events, just because they help build your core 360 and not just your rectus abdominis. So that's probably what I would go with. If I could just do suitcase carries for the rest of my life and that was the only core exercise I did, I'd be okay with it.
I like it. It makes me want to put those back in. I always kind of forget about those. How about within a training cycle, kind of battling mental health and stuff like that? So I know, of course, when you get beat up and all, you can really be down on yourself. But do you have any tricks of the trade to really kind of stay focused when it comes to competition prep or just life in general? When things get get you
down. So first, for training, we'll go training specifically. Yeah, I think no one is a stranger to, going through different waves of, loving training and not loving training so much. It's important to remember why you're doing it. And if you're not doing it if you're doing it for any other reason than you enjoy it, then I think you've already lost. But that being said, as someone who does enjoy competing and loves training, and even when I wasn't competing, have done physical training for as long as I can remember, that's still not always easy to remember. And I think that's where it becomes important outside of training and competing, the mental health aspect of identifying that it's okay to go through those waves. And I think a natural response is like, I'm just being weak, so I need to double down and be more disciplined, which there's truth to that too. And discipline is very important. But a lot of people use training and competing as like their therapy, so to speak. And while it can be a good coping mechanism to take your mind away from other struggles outside of competing, one day you're not going to have it. One day, for whether it's on your terms or your body's terms or someone else's terms, you're not going to have competing anymore. And if that has been your only coping mechanism, then you're going to be in real trouble when you no longer have access to it. And this is a really extreme example, but like if I told somebody, if you were training or competing to the point to where it became unhealthy, either mentally or physically, and you're doing more harm than good to your body, and someone said like, you need to stop this hurting you, and you said, well, this is the only thing that brings me happiness, so if I stop doing this, I will no longer be happy. I would reframe that and be like, if you asked me to stop drinking and I said the only reason, or if I stop drinking, I won't be happy, everybody would throw up red flags and like, oh, you have a fucking problem. And so that's probably not the case for most people in regards to competing, but that is how bad it can get. And so I encourage people to talk to a professional if you have the ability to and the means to, because while you can always, reach out to a friend, and friends are very important, but most people aren't, they don't have the ability or capability to actually give you the advice and, the reassurance that you need. Certainly not if it's somebody who's just going to tell you what they think you want to hear. And while it's important to have, battle buddies or really close friends that you can vent to, venting in itself isn't therapy. You need meaningful feedback, and sometimes meaningful feedback can hurt your feelings, but if you're not receptive to that and able to listen to it, then you're going to have a bad time. And it may not be the first conversation, it may be in a couple years from now, and you may already be too deep into it. But one problem, this is really big in the military too, and I think it's probably a problem in the strength community for the same reason of there's this stigma with seeking help, especially professional help, when it comes to mental health, because it's like, I'm tough. Like, why would I need somebody else's help? I can deadlift this much weight, or I won these titles. And it's like, that doesn't preclude you from, from mental health issues. And I would, as someone who's not technically qualified to give this advice, this is going to be a bit ironic of a statement, but I would be skeptical of anyone who's not a mental health professional giving you actual advice specific to you. This is just general advice telling you should get help if you need it, and don't be embarrassed to get help if you need it, or as a stepping stone if you don't have the means, because it can be.
But if you're a do it yourself kind of guy and you have to do it yourself and get yourself out of a hole, what would you say to that person?
I would say that no matter how tough you think you are, no matter what you have done in the past as an individual based solely off your own merit, the human species is not meant to be alone. And so at some point, you are going to have to come to terms with that. And seeking help from others, it doesn't have to be public. You don't have to make a post about it. You don't have to tell the world how hard your life is. You can keep it close to yourself and the other individual, whether they're a professional or not. And you can work through those feelings, because I would say that it is more a sign of strength to demonstrate the fact that you are incapable of doing something yourself and seeking help from the person who can help you with it, than it is to keep it inside and, let it fester. But I'm not speaking as I am speaking as someone who has gone through this. This last year has been really rough for me for a lot of reasons that I will not talk about here. But that was me. I was raised the same way I'm sure most people in the sport were raised, of like, you don't need help, just be tough, just suck it up. I've been in the military for almost 10 years. It's the same way there. Like, you just suck it up. And that's really easy to do with physical stress and physical pain. But when it comes to mental health, it's not always as easy. And it's really easy to fall to the vices of drugs, alcohol, PEDs, and then just training in general. They can all be extremely detrimental to your psychological health and then obviously your physical health. But yeah, get help, and your help can include but should not be limited to just someone you know on the internet.
I like it. Of course, thank you for sharing, Dan. But more importantly, is Princess Leia a Disney princess?
I guess technically now she is, but I mean, Princess Leia was created well before Disney bought out the franchise. So I'm going to stick with no. On principle, no. But if you had to go and look at it legally, she technically is.
So if someone gave you $1,000, you bet one way or the other, where you put your $1,000?
If I had to put money on it, I would say she's a Disney princess because she's a princess in what is now a Disney franchise.
All right. Well, I think that's our answer. And any out events you want to see get mixed into the kind of the current events going forward? So any like any old school stuff that you like to see? So at the Arnold right now, we're seeing the stone throw, where of course it looks like you almost pick it up all the way to the top and you see how fast you can run towards the line and throw it. So similar to kind of like a shot put or some other track and field event. But is there anything that Dan would like to see back into the mix?
I want to see a natural stone.
And do you want to see it, or do you want to do it yourself too?
Oh, I want to do it. What I meant by see is I want to see a promoter announce it and then me do it. Yeah, like was it Fortissimus in 2008? Still my favorite contest to watch, where Derek Poundstone lifted the last stone. But I think like natural stone is cool. The Arnold did the stone to shoulder, the natural stone to shoulder last year. That was really cool to watch. But I think a natural stone load series would be really fun.
Interesting. Let's see. What would be pretty challenging for were you tacky or no tacky?
No tacky.
Interesting. So what would be like the last stone, like 160 kilos, 352?
I guess it would depend on the height. I think if the height's like 48 inches, that's pretty standard, right? 48 inches. The heaviest one for middleweights would probably be like 375, maybe even 400, because depending on the stone, like there's natural stones that are easier to pick than.
But to load, if you have no tacky, you can't. It's hard to get that.
But it's different because on an Atlas stone, like you don't have anything to grip, so the tacky helps you because there's not like an edge. At least on a natural stone, you usually, and that's why I say it kind of depends on the stone. If we're talking natural stone, as in how the Rogue Invitational does it, where it's basically just like a
big concrete ball.
Atlas stone. I mean, yeah, tacky towel at a minimum, which is what they're allowed to use there.
What was their heaviest one? Heaviest one, 420?
Yeah. I would say low fours, because like what's the Husafel, the actual Husafel stone?
It's 407, because I had that question wrong. I went with on Darren's podcast with John, World's Strongest Opinions, and that was my question and I got it wrong, but it's 407. I'm pretty sure. You're going to Iceland soon, aren't you? When you making a trip?
We went to Iceland in September.
Oh.
We're going to actually go to Hawaii the end of January. That was the present I got for our anniversary for Natalie. And then for my getting out of the Army present, Natalie is taking me to Scotland and then Manchester in May.
Wow. Well, that's going to be awesome.
So, I don't know if we'll get, I want to plan a Iceland trip with some strongmen to do some of the manhood stones. But when we went there, it was for my 30th birthday. And Nat had planned it for me to do the Husafell stone, but I didn't train for it at all. And the morning of, I woke up and I was like, I don't want to ruin this trip by driving 4 hours out of the way to potentially fail the Husafell stone. So let's just go to this natural spring spa instead. That's not
good consolation.
Yeah, that sounded more appealing. But
But you were touching upon it a little bit. Yeah, tell us a little bit about your future. What does 2023 have in store, and what are some goals
Oh
that
man.
you want to share with the viewers?
Well, I'm supposed to get out of the Army in May as of now. I just put in an extension till September because right now the plan is to go to school to get my master's in sports psychology. And eventually I would like to get a doctorate in psychology, but this is the first step. So one reason I want to do that, I don't necessarily have a specific job lined up for it. But given my athletic background and my military background, I think with that degree, I'll have a lot of options. Ideally, I want to work with either athletes or like special operations soldiers, because all special operations units have a psychologist that works with them. And generally, not exclusively, but generally a lot of those people, they have all of the credentials, but they don't necessarily have the experience to back it up. And so I'd like to be in a position where I'm working with people that I don't just know psychologically how to deal with what they're going through, but I've lived some part of it and can actually give them real background on how the concepts should be applied in their specific position. So that's pretty crazy because the last 12 years of my life have been 100% dedicated to the Army. So it is a little daunting, if I'm being honest, making that transition. Because if you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have told you that I was going to be in the Army for the rest of my life. So that's exciting, slash also nerve-wracking. And then going back to school in itself, I'm gonna be the old guy in class, so that'll be fun.
About any strongman goals you want to share?
I really want to deadlift 800 pounds. So right now, this isn't in stone. There's still some variables that will lead to the ultimate decision of whether I do or don't do them. But as far as competitions, I have Clash and then ASM and then OSG. Those are the three I plan on doing right now. I will be at the, as it stands right now, I'll be at the Arnold. I think I'm going to volunteer with Strongman Corps to help James put on the show. So if you're going to be there, I will be around. But I mean, that's really it. If I'm being completely honest and transparent, one goal that I have for Strongman is to also enjoy training again, because I have not enjoyed training for a while. Kind of comes and goes. I do it even when I have good workouts help. They do make me like it more. But right now, since I'm not in contest prep, it's just kind of hit or miss. Physically, I feel pretty good. It's just sometimes I load the bar up and I was like, this isn't even heavy, but I just don't want to do this at all.
You know, I feel like when you're not in competition prep and it's dark out and you have to drive to the gym, I sometimes lack motivation, and I'll go to the small gym kind of in my condo plex and just to get a workout in. But
yeah,
I think sometimes it is tough to kind of build that motivation. But again, you just always have those goals in mind. But doing Clash, OSG, ASM, that's a great trio. I think last year, only 3 people, including myself, James, and Johnny Waz, did all 3 of those. This year, I don't think there was anybody that did all three of those contests. And you can kind of consider those are kind of like the majors, but McKeegan can't because I would say no American.
yeah. Well,
but
yeah.
McKeegan with that OSG and Clash.
He did he do, was it USL?
He did
SCL rather.
He did Ultimate Strongman in Paris. So the show that Mike O'Connor did,
Which was around the same time
as ASM.
ASM. It was like the week after, right?
So you did like 3 major shows, but in terms of the Americans, yeah.
But even he admitted that was a lot, and he did say in hindsight that he doesn't know if that was the best decision. I mean, that's for him to speak on.
You just gotta live and learn. You gotta roll the dice and see how it goes. But what about on the flip side? But if you just went out and won it, then it'd been the best decision. So sometimes when you're doing all those competitions, you are you are kind of rolling the dice. You are running a fine line in terms of margin of error. So you really had to be well executed. You'd be on top of everything, your recovery, your training, your health, your sleep, in order to really execute and doing well on all those shows. So something that we see from the big guys, the ones that do 7-8 shows a year. So
Yeah.
holy, that's pretty exciting. But those are all my kind of questions for today, Dan. I'm going to put all your socials on the bottom. So Dan's on TikTok, Dan's on Instagram. And of course, you can also visit the U.S. Army team and all. But Dan, to end the show, lately I've been doing one piece of advice. So you gave a lot of wisdom today, but what's one lasting piece of wisdom you want to share to the listeners?
Oh man. I'll just quote myself from a post I made right after OSG is one day you're not going to have competing anymore. And when you look back, none of your trophies, none of your checks are going to matter. But what people are going to remember is who you were as a person and your integrity as a person. So at no point in time during your strongman career or any other career you may have, should you compromise your integrity. So make sure you're being a good dude, good gal, and don't lose yourself in the pursuit of trying to find success in whatever worldly thing you are pursuing.
Amazing. That is great advice for anybody that's listening. Guys, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, notification bell. And until next time, everybody, stay strong.